Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied, with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A good tavach, a good week. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer HaTanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights, LLC, and it is in honor and memory of Rabbi Yosef Halevi Weinberg, Olav HaShalom, Rabbi Moshe Pinchas HaKoyen Katz, Olav HaShalom, Rabbi Yoel HaKoyen Khan, Olav HaShalom. And it's also in schus and merit of Rabbi Zev Yecheskel HaKoyen and Risha Katz, La'irich Yomim, V'shanim Tevis, for many long, healthy years. We're in the middle of chapter 9, Perek Tes of Tanya, and discussing literally in a step-by-step process of transformation, essentially. Everything we human beings aspire to grow, to be better people, to be a better individual, and ultimately, not just to subdue and refrain and control our animal desires, but actually to transform them. So to transform your very being. So with this fascinating and basically simple example of a war, of a battle between two kings, the Alter Rebbe crystallizes for us the actual steps. And when you look through it, you actually see steps, step by step. We were able to enumerate 8 steps. So let's just sum that up, and then we'll continue learning inside as the Alter Rebbe continues to develop this concept. But this is like the formula. So, when you have two nations, two kings at war with each other, and this is the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara, the divine soul and the animal soul, Ulom Ulom Yemach, two nations that are opposed to each other, which is the expression used when Rivka was pregnant with Yaakov and Esav. So two nations they represented, two archetypes. And they battle over control. What do they want to control? They want to control the city. What is the city in the moral here? The city is you, your body and your faculties. Where will they be focused on? What will your body and faculties focus on? Your mind, your heart. So it could be focused on self-preservation, on survival, on self-interest, on needs, on your own needs, selfish needs. Or they can be focused on something greater and transcendent, God, the divine, the purpose of your life. And that's essentially the battle. But like it is with a regular war, when I say regular, I mean a war in this material world, you don't just conquer a city and all its citizens and everything is fine. It takes stages. You can conquer and technically control the city, but not all the citizens, not all the people living there are necessarily accepting your authority. And even if you have authority, is it willingly accepting? Even if they accept it, there's always this dissidence. There's always resistance. There are those that still do not accept. And even if they do accept, is it just you're just causing them to not attack you, or can you actually turn them into allies and friends? And this is the step-by-step process. In truth, if you want to think about it, it's not just in a war, in a physical war between two kings. Every time you communicate with someone and you're creating a relationship, you also have, let's say you love someone dearly and you have a very strong position, you want to persuade them. So you can force yourself upon another person, basically threaten them or impose yourself, or you can convince, you can inspire. And the goal is not just to impose your will, but to actually create the relationship. And same thing here. The goal is not just that the divine soul and the divine intentions dominate, but you want them to be loved. You want them to be accepted. So when you talk to someone in the simple communication, let's say, someone goes to a city and they are interested in inspiring Jews or others to become closer to God, to live up to what their destiny is. So you can do it by yelling at people, you could do it by trying to impose, or you can do it by inspiring, by in a way explaining that they themselves will say, you know what, Till now I was opposed to this approach for whatever reason, and now I can see the merit and the value. And the same thing when we educate our children. So bottom line is, what we're discussing here is really a methodology that is relevant to any type of convincing another. And now when I say convincing, I mean convincing in a real way where it resonates with the other. So let's just spell out the stages as the Alter Rebbe himself spelled it out. So when he spoke about, first he gave the example of the two kings, and then he went back to Nefesh Elokis. And the main focus of this chapter is the Nefesh Elokis, because that's the ultimate goal we want, even though there's a battle. But the objective is that the Nefesh Elokis should dominate, should win the battle. So like he said in the beginning of the Perek, he said, right? Which is the two nations, and the battles over the Irktana Zehaguf, the small city which is the body, and its limbs, its faculties, its limbs, its organs, its faculties, which are the citizens of the small city called the body. And what is the goal? That the king wants to say, that's the first thing. That the battle consists of both souls, the divine soul and the animal soul, from the klipa, from the other side, from the shell, which is focused on self, as opposed to the fruit, to the divine within the shell, are at battle with each other over the body and kolevarov, all the limbs, all the faculties. But it's Shena, and here are the levels. And the will of the Nefesh Elokis is shetehi levada hemeshalas alav, that she alone, meaning the divine soul alone, not in partnership, she alone should be the king, the ruler, the governor, umanigose, to rule and also to govern the body and all its faculties. That too you can break into two, meshalas and manigose, which we discussed. Then, v'chol evarim yisorin l'mashmaita. It goes further. That all the evarim should follow and listen to the king's instructions, to the divine soul's instructions, which, as we said, is a deeper level. Not just that it rules and governs, but the evarim themselves should listen. The citizens should listen, and the nimshal is that the human being, and we'll soon learn the details, our mind, our emotions, your mind and your emotions should listen to what the divine soul has to say. Furthermore, ubtelim etzlo legamri. That's even deeper. It should be completely sublimated, completely subjugated to the divine soul, completely. So here, b'telim and the word legamri. So if you really break it down, it's even more than 8 levels, because you could have bittul and it's not legamri, but he's saying legamri, complete. Tein loisa legamri. Then comes the next level. Some bittul itself, as we discussed, you could have bittul where you're subjugated and you listen, and more than listen, you're actually you're humbled, and the way you surrender through devotion and commitment to the divine soul. But merkava is you become a vehicle to it. Next level. Then, furthermore, to become a garment, which we said is even more than a vehicle. A vehicle is an outside entity. However, its entire purpose is dedicated to serve and be a vehicle for the divine soul. It's a levush to the 10 faculties and to the 3 garments. This is already setting the stage of what we're going to learn shortly afterwards, as the Alter Rebbe continues. And furthermore, she'islapshu kulam be'evri haguf, that all the faculties of the divine soul should manifest in the Evri Haguf, which is the citizens of the city, of the small city, which is the body, V'yi Haguf kulei, and furthermore, and that the body should be kulei mole mehem levadam. So what you see here, it's no longer just an entity that initially was an enemy, if it was controlled by the animal soul. but definitely was not listening to and accepting the desire and the will of the divine soul. So now, not only did it accept the will, it actually now gets filled with it, becomes a vehicle, becomes a garment, to the point that it's entirely filled only with the divine intentions, the goal of the divine soul. Complete control. And finally, v'lo yavra zar, b'seicham chas v'shalom. And nothing else, no stranger, no other force enters, because you can still say, even if it's filled, but there's still room for some dissent, for someone that still opposes the control of the divine soul. So no, lo yavra zar b'teichem chas v'shalom. So you see here stages, literally from first just the basic, when a person being, let's say right now you're sitting down to have a meal. Your animal soul tells you to indulge. Your divine soul says, no, make a blessing, think about God, think about the strength you're going to gain from the food and how you'll use it to do a mitzvah. Or, divrei reshus, l'shem shamayim. So you're eating the food for the sake of heaven. And there's a battle going on. Now the battle could be won just by simply you make the blessing and you have that cognizance. So the divine soul is in control right now. But is it fully in control? Is it really something that will be lasting? Next time you eat. So that's how these levels all come into play. How deep is the divine soul affecting you? It could be just a temporary effect. It could be an effect, but it's more in a form of superimposing dominance. Or are you actually listening to it? Are you even furthermore surrendered to it and bottled and subjugated to it? To the point that you become a merkava, vehicle to what the divine soul wants. Further, a garment, to the point that all of you becomes filled only with what the divine goals are, to the point that there's no room for a zar, for any other side force. So the truth is, any one of these levels is the divine soul winning the battle. However, the question is how deep that victory is. Total victory is when the city is completely not just under control, but the king doesn't even have to watch, because everything has been transformed to listen to what the divine soul has to say. And as we discussed, even though you can say not every one of us can reach this highest level, we're going to learn that a Tzaddik Gomur, the next chapter, Perik Yud, reaches this level. But all of us have the capacity to fight the battle and win the battle because we have a divine soul. Yes, we need to contend with the animal soul, but this is the step-by-step process. What's so powerful here is that it shows us that wherever you are, you don't have to win the whole battle. Even a small little victory is already a big achievement. So it's like in any situation, when you think of an enemy as someone that's an adversary, right away it frightens us. Formidable adversary. But when you think of it in stages, that you're not asked to necessarily conquer the city overnight, step by step, it makes it far more and easier to digest and easier to realize that it's very doable. And that's the approach we have to take whenever any challenge faces us. Think of it in a step-by-step process and see where you stand. Sometimes you need to begin on the early steps simply to control your animal urges. Or like I gave the example before in education, there needs certain type of discipline, or in communication with others, or in relationships. And then you grow from there. So if your child, you're educating your child, you see a child do something that is selfish, something that is inappropriate. So you teach your child, you're supposed to say thank you, share a toy. So in the beginning, it may be very behavioral. In the sense you're simply telling the child and you give them an incentive. The child might not fully understand that's the right thing to do. But then the process continues. You actually teach your child that this is good. And the child naturally becomes a giving person, someone that shows gratitude, kindness. And that's where the child has become more transformed to the point that they're really a channel for what they're supposed to be doing. Not just they're doing it. So it's not just a behavioral shift, but actually become second nature. And each of these steps can be identified. So if, in truth, you could write an entire book on education, or on communication, or on relationships, or on how to influence people. By using these steps and saying step by step. Your goal is to reach a point where like he said, the language that he used there, but the goal is that the last step is that means you have a complete ally. You transformed the city and its citizens to become your ally. In this case, the ally of the divine soul. And there's no room for any stranger or for any alien force to oppose you. That means you've really done a great job. That's like to use a marketing example. You've converted someone that's visited your domain, and you've converted them to become a loyal customer, to the point they come back on their own. Just as another example. In the beginning, it could be they wouldn't come back on their own. You need to incentivize them. You need some other ways to motivate them. So wherever you look in life, you can find these stages. Just to make it more palpable in ways that we can relate to and we can identify with. Okay, so now the next part of the Perek we're up to actually combines what we learned earlier in chapter Gimel and Daled, especially we're starting with chapter 3 in Tanya. So there the Alter Rebbe explained, if you recall, after explaining the divine soul and its nature, the Alter Rebbe then went on to explain the faculties of the divine soul. That there are 10 faculties that evolve from the 10 spheres. Shtalshel mehem. And those are the 3 cognitive, Chachma, Bina, and Das, which give birth to the Midas, the emotional. Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes. So now, there he explained it to understand how the divine soul functions. Now he's going to connect it to now that we understand how the divine soul and animal soul are at war with each other. We also know the location. The divine soul residing in the mind and the right side of the heart. The animal soul residing in the left side of the heart. So now you can visualize an actual confrontation between the right side of the heart, the mind and the right side of the heart, with the left side of the heart. The passions, the fiery passions of the animal soul's selfish desires, and the reflective mind, and even the emotions that are divine emotions, as we discussed earlier in the chapter. So he's going to combine now what we learned in chapter 3 and apply it to now that we understand this battle. We'll also understand better this process of how the mind and the emotions and ultimately the garments, because remember, after chapter 3 comes chapter 4 and then chapter 5, and they all discuss the garments of the divine soul. So the rest of this chapter, almost till the end of the chapter, is focused and concerned with how we understand now this battle or the wishes of the divine soul to control the human being in the context of the mind and the emotions and the garments. And then at the end of the chapter, the Alter Rebbe is going to go back. That's the divine soul. And the animal soul wants the opposite. It wants to control the city. It wants to control the human being and his faculties. And there'll be a few lines about that, so then we'll have the whole picture of this battle. But as you see, the main focus is on the divine soul for the obvious reason. Firstly, that's the purpose. We want to have the divine soul win. Secondly, also to empower us, it's far easier to just gravitate and allow your selfish desires. You don't need any effort for that. In this world, the Nefesh Habamis, without effort, is going to be the dominant one. Because they're able to conceal themselves, like we learned earlier. This is a world that the Elam Hazeh, Molde Klippas v'Sitra Achra. It's filled with klippas, and we don't see the divine. So we need much more effort, much more explanation, much more empowerment to give us the resources, like we learned in the beginning of Tanya. Tanya b'Seif Perek is that a person mashbir say teit tzaddik v'al tirosha. That we should be at tzaddik. We should allow the divine soul to dominate, and not the Yerosha with the animal soul dominating. So now let's learn this inside. where he's going to now apply, as I said, chapter 3, combined with what we just learned about this battle. So here's how the Alter Rebbe continues. So let's continue in chapter 9. The Hainu, this means, this what we just learned. And let's just make sure that we have the flow. What was the line before? That the entire, let's read a line before that even, where he says, V'yir aguf kule mole mehem levadom. Mole mehem with what? With the faculties of the divine soul. And no strange force, no alien force should enter that domain. Even Yaver, even just pass through. Pass through, as we discussed. It's not just they don't reside, they don't reside there any longer, because they've even been transformed, or anything that didn't belong was eliminated. But transformed is the real goal. But it's not even Yaver Zor, not even passing through. So now we continue. Dahainu, and this means Tlas Mechin. So now he's explaining how the divine soul controls the city, the human being. That the Tlas Mechin Shebereish, that the 3 intellectual faculties in the brain. So we know in Kabbalah and Zohar, a number of places talks about 3 brains: the right brain, the left brain, the center brain. Sometimes that's the way it's described. The Chalol, the Gilgal, the Gimel Chalon, there are 3 chambers. So he's saying there are 3 Moichin, Shebereish, like he said in the beginning of chapter 3 in Tanya, earlier. So the brain itself, the Moichin, can go either way. It depends who's going to control it. The mind can be used, as we learned earlier, by the animal soul, where you're focusing on using your mind either for your own selfish desires or teachings or ideas that are not about God. We learned even about things like science and other things, that even, there's nothing wrong per se with the science. But your mind is, instead of focusing on the purpose of your life, were you given a mind? That the mind should be focused on God and God's purpose for you in your life. So here, what's happening when the Nefesh Elikis is ultimately winning the battle, and wins the battle, is that the Tlas Meicha Shebereish, he says literally the words memulin. Remember, that was a word he just said earlier, mole mehem levado. That the faculties of the divine soul, that the human being should be filled only with the divine. What does that mean practically? Till now, we just said it in general terms. What does it mean that the divine soul controls? So let's go back to the Moshel. When you talk about a king who's controlling a city, so there's the idea of he's controlling. And now not only controlling, but all the people in the city are his allies, are his subjects and ready to follow, and they are go through all the levels, the bittel, the merkava, the levush, their vehicles. But it's malchusei baratzon kibla aleim. They've accepted malchusei yizbarach, like we do on Rosh Hashanah. So that's in general terms. What does it mean specifically? It means that the mind of the citizens of the people, the iktana ze'aguf, starting with the mind, is filled with what? What is it filled with? Not on my own interest, but what the king wants. And who's the king here? We're talking about is the Nefesh Elikis. So that's the first thing. Mamuli mechachma bin v'dasha b'nefesh Elikis. So what is your mind occupied with when this in this state where the divine soul is the one that's controlling the city? It's occupied with what God wants, not what I want. Why am I here? What's the purpose of my life? Famous story where the Chassid came to the Alter Rebbe and gave him a whole list of things he wants and needs. The Alter Rebbe listened patiently, and then after he finished, the Alter Rebbe said, okay. Es mir gesagt, alle Sachen, was du darfst, aber auf was darf man dir? You told me everything that you're needed for, but what are you needed for? You told me everything you need, but what are you needed for? In other words, why are you here? Not just about your needs being fulfilled. So the mind is occupied. What does God want of me? What is my mission in this world? And then how to figure out how to fulfill that mission. In general, learning Torah does that. When you learn your mind Torah, what are you doing? You're learning God's wisdom, like we learned earlier in Tanya. So your mind is occupied with what God's mind thinks. And when you're studying, God is studying in direct connection with you, like a chavrusa, like a partner. So your mind is occupied not with business and not with extracurricular activities, but with what God wants, with what the divine. That's what the divine soul does. And what is that? What does it mean that the nefesh of the Chachma bin das nefesh shehi Chachmas Hashem that we're talking about here? Chachmas Hashem. The intellectual inquiry of God, ubinose, and its understanding. That you're trying to understand the wisdom of God. And ubinose, that's chachma. And binose, the comprehension of it, because the chachma, like we learned in chapter 3, is the nekuda. The key is when we begin the process, conceiving of an idea. Ubinose. What does that mean? Lizbainen bigdulose, by contemplating on God's greatness, asher ad ein cheker ve'ein sof, by contemplating or pondering on God's unfathomable and endless greatness. So this requires an intellectual focus of Chochmah and Bina, conceiving the idea and then developing it, and that's what your mind is occupied with. And by contrast, just ask yourself, what is your mind occupied with most of the time? Not necessarily this. But that's what the divine soul wants of you. And then he continues, like he said in chapter 3, Ulohelid mehen al yidei hadas, and through mehen, through what? Through Chochmah and Bina, the father and the mother, which are necessary to give birth to a child. Same thing here, the mind is giving birth to emotions. But it's al yidei hadas, like he explained in chapter 3 as well, hiskashus, that the midah should be complete and not what he called there, dimyena shav, just illusions or delusions, but sustainable and real emotions, a viable child, or in this case, a viable emotions. You need das, from the word iskashus. The adam yoda as chav, as he explained at the end of chapter 3. So, and to give birth from Chochmah Bina through das, through this iskashus, to give birth to what? To the midas. Hayire b'meiche upachad Hashem b'libei. The reverence in the person's mind. Upachad Hashem, we'll call it the trepidation of God in the person's heart. So there you have the midas. And the order is exactly as it was in chapter 3, because even though chesed comes before gvura in the regular order, but practically speaking, the first thing is a respect and reverence of God before you really develop a relationship, as we shall discuss as we read further. But we'll stop here. And he's going to continue to talk about this love and develop it further, and you're going to see here how also all the stages till total transformation of the human being, total transformation of the animal soul as well. So we'll stop here. Go to TanyaApplied.com. You could hear this in all the previous programs. You can also submit any question. And everyone have a good tavach. Be well.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit ChasidusApplied.com for archived classes and more resources.